A millionaire sees his childhood love begging with two 3-year-old twin children and recognizes her, but what he does next is unbelievable. Before we start the story, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Ethan Cole, a hard-faced millionaire, stepped off the curb at a crowded intersection in downtown Chicago when something on the corner made him stop cold. Sitting by a cracked brick wall, clutching two small children, was a woman whose face seemed carved out of heartbreak. Her hair was tangled, her clothes dirty and torn, and her voice was trembling as she whispered to one of the girls. "Shh, baby. Someone will help us soon. Mommy's right here." The little girl wiped her tears with her small, dusty hands. Her twin sister, same tangled curls, same tired eyes, was quiet but clung tightly to her mother's arm. Ethan froze. His chest tightened. He knew that face. Even beneath the dirt, the hollow cheeks, and the years of pain, he knew. It was Grace Mitchell, his first love. The girl who once made his heart race every time she laughed down the high school hallway. The same girl who had never noticed him, except maybe to tease him when he stumbled over his words or blushed too hard trying to say hello. And now, she was sitting on the street with two children begging. Ethan felt his pulse in his ears as he walked closer. His sharp business instincts faded, replaced by an ache he hadn't felt in years. "Grace," he said softly. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Ethan," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The traffic, the noise, the city, all of it blurred into silence. Grace lowered her gaze quickly, ashamed. "Please just go," she murmured, hugging her daughters tighter. "We're fine." Ethan could see she was lying. One of the twins had a runny nose and tear-streaked cheeks. The other looked too tired to even cry. Their shoes were worn down to holes. "You're not fine," Ethan said quietly. "Come with me." She shook her head. "No, you don't have to do this." "I can't. I'm not leaving you out here," Ethan interrupted firmly. "You and your girls are coming with me. I won't take no for an answer." The twins looked up, curious and frightened. One hid behind her mother's leg. The other held out a small hand, unsure whether to trust the stranger in the tailored suit. Ethan crouched down to their level. "Hey there," he said gently. "I'm a friend of your mom's. You don't have to be scared." Grace bit her lip, torn between pride and desperation. Then, with a small nod, she gave in. She knew she had no other choice. Ethan pulled out his phone. "Tyler, bring the car around. Right now. Corner of Madison and 5th. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and extended his hand to Grace. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm and steady, completely different from the cold wind biting through the streets. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up. The driver opened the door, glancing curiously at the woman and her children. Ethan helped Grace inside, then gently lifted one of the twins into his arms. During the ride, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the engine and the soft breathing of two exhausted little girls who soon fell asleep, their heads resting on their mother's lap. Ethan looked at Grace through the dim reflection of the window. How had things gone so wrong? The Grace he remembered had been full of life, bright, confident, the kind of girl who always knew what she wanted. Now, she looked like a ghost of that person. When the car stopped in front of Ethan's mansion, Grace's eyes widened. The large gates, the polished cars, the glowing windows, everything seemed too unreal. "Ethan, this is your home?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes. And tonight it's yours too." She shook her head quickly. "No, Ethan, I can't. This isn't right. You don't owe me anything." He met her eyes. "You're not staying on the street another night. That's final." As they walked up the steps, Ethan's housekeeper, Mrs. Walker, opened the door, her face lighting up before fading into confusion when she saw Grace and the twins. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. Should I prepare the guest rooms?" "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "The big one upstairs. And make sure there's food ready. Something warm." Mrs. Walker nodded and hurried off. Grace stood frozen near the entrance, overwhelmed by the luxury around her. The marble floor, the chandelier, the faint smell of lavender polish. It was all too much. "You don't have to be scared," Ethan said softly. "You're safe here." Grace's lip trembled. "I don't even know what to say." "Say thank you after you've eaten," he replied, half smiling. She laughed weakly, her voice cracking. It was the first sound of hope he'd heard from her. Within minutes, the girls were curled up on a couch near the fireplace, their tiny faces lit by the warm glow. Ethan stood quietly by the window, hands in his pockets, watching them drift to sleep while Mrs. Walker brought food. Grace turned to him, tears shining in her tired eyes. "Ethan, thank you." "Really?" He nodded but said nothing. His mind was already spinning. He needed to know how someone like Grace, so full of promise, had ended up here. He knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The first light of dawn crept through the tall windows of Ethan Cole's mansion. Grace Mitchell was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in the guest room. For the first time in years, her daughters, Ella and Emma, slept soundly, wrapped in soft blankets instead of old coats. Grace watched them with mixed feelings, relief, disbelief, and a deep knot of guilt. Across the hall, Ethan sat in his study, staring at the city skyline through the glass. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace huddled on that sidewalk, clutching the twins. He needed answers. A soft knock broke his thoughts. Mrs. Walker stepped in. "Mr. Cole, breakfast is ready. Miss Mitchell and the children can come down whenever they're ready." "Thank you," he said quietly. He straightened his shirt, rehearsing what to say. Grace and the twins appeared in the dining room a few minutes later. The girl's eyes widened at the table filled with fruit, pastries, and warm milk. "Mommy, can we really eat all this?" Ella asked. Grace nodded, smiling faintly. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Ethan entered then, crisp in a white dress shirt, looking relaxed but serious. "Good morning," he greeted. Grace murmured a shy morning, pulling out a chair. They ate mostly in silence, except for the happy chatter of the twins. When they finished, Mrs. Walker led the girls to the playroom, leaving Ethan and Grace alone. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Grace, we need to talk. I want to understand what happened to you." She lowered her eyes, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "It's not something I like to talk about." "I'm not here to judge," he said gently. I need to know. Yesterday you were sitting on a sidewalk with 2 kids. That doesn't happen overnight." Grace took a long breath. After a pause, she began. "After high school, I started seeing Ryan Parker," she said quietly. Ethan's jaw clenched. He remembered Ryan. The popular boy everyone liked, the same one who never took responsibility for anything. "I thought he loved me," Grace continued. "A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. When I told him, he disappeared. He said he wasn't ready for a family, and that was it. I tried to reach him, but he blocked me everywhere." Ethan's fists tightened, but he stayed silent. "My parents helped for a while," Grace went on. "But my mom got sick, and I had to take care of her. Bills piled up. I worked 2 jobs, but when she passed away, I couldn't keep up. We lost the apartment. Since then, I've just kept going wherever I could. Shelters, friends' couches, the streets when we had no choice." Her voice cracked. "I did everything I could for the girls, but it was never enough." Ethan sat back, shaken. The confident girl he'd known had faced more than he could imagine. "Grace," he said softly, "why didn't you ever ask for help?" She shook her head. "I was ashamed. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. Especially you. You became someone, Ethan. And me." Her eyes glistened. "I became everything I used to look down on." He reached across the table, his tone firm but kind. "No one deserves to go through that. You're not alone anymore. I'm going to help you and the girls get back on your feet." She frowned slightly. "Why, Ethan? After everything, why would you care?" He hesitated, then said the truth. "Because I never stopped caring. Not since we were kids." Grace looked away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Grace sat by the window of the guest room. She thought about everything Ethan had said. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope, and it terrified her. Accepting help meant facing her fears and rebuilding from the ground up. In his office downstairs, Ethan watched the security feed of the quiet hallways, then turned it off. He wasn't thinking about business tonight. He was thinking about the woman upstairs, and the 2 little girls who had changed his house in just one day. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Ethan Cole's mansion, filling the hall with a warm glow. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Grace Mitchell stood by the counter, uncertain if she should touch anything. She'd spent years trying not to be noticed in other people's spaces. Now she found herself surrounded by marble floors and quiet luxury. "Morning," Ethan said as he stepped in, sleeves rolled up. "Coffee?" Grace nodded. "Please." He poured her a cup and handed it over. "How did you sleep?" Better than I have in a long time, she admitted. The girls too. They didn't wake once. I'm glad, he said, smiling. You all deserve some peace. Ella and Emma came running in wearing fresh clothes Mrs. Walker had laid out. Their laughter echoed through the room like music. Ethan watched them race around the kitchen island. They look happy. Grace followed his gaze. It's been a while since I've seen them smile like that. Ethan leaned against the counter. They need clothes, shoes, whatever's missing. Let's take care of that today. Oh, you don't have to. He cut her off gently. Grace, you're not arguing. Let me help. Half an hour later, the four of them were in Ethan's car headed downtown. The twins pressed their faces to the window, amazed by everything they passed. Inside a children's store, they darted between aisles, touching every colorful thing in sight. Mommy, can I get this? Ella asked, holding up a glittery blue dress. Grace smiled, fighting back tears. Yes, sweetheart. Emma appeared beside them clutching sneakers. Me too. Of course, baby. Ethan stood nearby, hands in his pockets, quietly pleased. The girls' laughter filled the shop, and Grace's shoulders began to relax for the first time in years. They left with bags full of clothes, shoes, and a few small toys the twins refused to let go of. At lunch, they sat by the window of a quiet cafe. The girls ate with excitement while Grace tried to process everything. You've done so much for us already, she said softly. I just did what anyone should, Ethan replied. She shook her head. Not everyone would. Back at the mansion, Ella and Emma ran to show Mrs. Walker their new outfits. Grace stood by the window watching them spin and twirl. Ethan came up beside her. They're incredible kids. They're my reason for everything, she said. You're stronger than you think, Grace, Ethan said. Most people would have given up long ago. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just stubborn. The next days slid into a new rhythm. Each morning the twins played in the garden under Mrs. Walker's eye while Grace helped with small tasks around the house, insisting on contributing. In the evenings Ethan joined them for dinner, his calm presence softening the heavy air that used to hang over the mansion. But even as she settled in, Grace couldn't shake the thought that she didn't belong. She told herself it was temporary, just until she could stand on her own again. A week passed quietly in Ethan's mansion. Grace slowly grew used to the softness of real sheets and the steady rhythm of meals. Ella and Emma adapted quickly, filling the hallways with laughter. But Grace herself still carried unease, the kind that comes when comfort feels borrowed. Ethan noticed. One afternoon he found her in the kitchen rinsing dishes. You don't have to do that, he said. I need to do something, she replied. I can't just sit here and let everyone take care of me. He smiled faintly. Then do something for yourself. Grace frowned. What do you mean? You said you used to love reading and learning. What if you went back to school? Finish what you started. She froze. That's impossible. I don't have the time or the money. You'd have both, Ethan interrupted. I can cover the expenses and make sure the girls are cared for. Grace, this isn't charity. It's a chance. She looked away, struggling with pride. You've already done enough. This isn't about me, he said quietly. It's about Ella and Emma. The stronger you are, the better life they'll have. Grace stared at the countertop, his words echoing. She knew he was right, but her heart warred with her shame. I'll think about it, she said at last. That's all I ask, Ethan replied. That night, after the twins were asleep, he handed her a small envelope. Inside were brochures for evening courses, business, communication, finance. I think you'd be great at this, Ethan said. You've always had a sharp mind. You just never had the chance to use it fully. Grace ran her fingers over the paper. You really believe I can do this? I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't. She smiled faintly, the first real confidence showing through. Over the next few days, Grace weighed the idea. She spent long evenings sitting by the window, imagining what it would feel like to build a future again, not just survive. Finally, one morning over breakfast, she looked across the table at Ethan. I've decided. I'm going to do it. Ethan's face lit up. That's the best news I've heard in a long time. Within a week, Grace enrolled in classes. Mrs. Walker agreed to look after the twins during her study hours, and Ethan turned one of his unused offices into a small study space for her. When Grace saw it, the desk, the notebooks, the computer, she covered her mouth in disbelief. You did all this for me? For you and your future, he said simply. Now get to work. She laughed, shaking her head, and sat down. For the first time in years, she felt purpose. As weeks passed, Grace rediscovered parts of herself she thought were gone. Every new lesson, every test, every success filled her with energy. Ethan checked in often, encouraging her quietly, never pushing too hard. He watched her change, her eyes brighter, her confidence returning, and felt something deep grow inside him that he hadn't felt in years. But one afternoon, his calm was shaken. He'd found someone from Grace's past, Ryan Parker. He called Grace into his study. "Grace, we need to talk." Her stomach tightened. "What's wrong?" "I found Ryan," he said evenly. "I spoke to him." Her eyes widened. "You did what?" "I wanted to understand what happened. Why he left you and the girls." Her hands trembled. "You had no right." "Maybe not," he said, "but I couldn't stand not knowing." Grace's breath came shallow. "What did he say?" Ethan hesitated. "He admitted everything. He knew you were pregnant. He said he wasn't ready. He just walked away." Grace went still. For a moment the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Did he ask about the girls?" she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Not once." Grace looked down, eyes brimming with tears. A small, broken laugh escaped her lips. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised." Ethan reached across the desk, resting his hand over hers. "You don't have to face him. Not ever again." She nodded, staring at the floor. "I know, but I need to stop letting him live in my head." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She sat in the dark kitchen, a cup of cold tea untouched in front of her. She thought of Ryan, of all the years she had begged fate for an explanation. Now she had one, and it meant nothing. Days passed, but Grace couldn't shake the heaviness left by Ethan's confession. She tried to study, to smile at Ella and Emma, to focus on the present, but Ryan's name echoed in her mind. Every unfinished thought ended with him walking away. One morning, while the twins played in the garden, Grace sat at her desk staring at a blank page. After a long minute she reached for her phone and scrolled to the number Ethan had used to track Ryan down. Her thumb hovered, then pressed call. The line rang twice before a flat male voice answered. "Hello, Ryan," she said quietly. Silence. Then a short, uneasy laugh. "Grace? Wow, it's been years." "Yes. We need to talk." He sighed. "About what?" "There's nothing left to say." "It's about the girls," she replied firmly. "They deserve to know I tried to reach you one last time." Another pause, then a shrug in his tone. "Look, I've moved on. I'm not the family type. I hope you're doing okay, but..." The click of a disconnection cut him off. Grace stared at the phone until the screen went dark. No anger, just a strange calm. The answer was clear now. There was nothing left to expect. That evening Ethan found her sitting on the couch with the twins asleep beside her. "I talked to him," she said before he could ask. "And, as expected, he doesn't care." Ethan clenched his jaw. "He's a fool." Grace looked down at her daughters and whispered, "Maybe. But I'm finally done waiting." She smiled faintly. "I can breathe again." Ethan reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did the right thing, Grace. You closed that door yourself." She nodded, tears forming but not falling. "Thank you for standing by me." "Always," he said simply. The next morning, a small notebook lay on the kitchen table with a silver pen resting on top. A note in Ethan's handwriting read, "For your plans, dreams, and everything you're about to build. Eh." Grace opened the notebook and smiled. For the first time in years she wrote down goals instead of worries. Finish the course, find meaningful work, give Ella and Emma stability. Ethan's faith in her had lit something she thought was gone. Weeks passed quickly. Grace spent mornings studying and afternoons helping with light office tasks Ethan assigned to her, small responsibilities to rebuild her confidence. Each success made her stronger. Ethan watched her transformation with quiet pride. The tired woman from the sidewalk was disappearing, replaced by someone determined and bright. One Friday evening, he walked into her study carrying a folder. "I have something for you," he said, setting it on her desk. Inside was a short contract stamped with the Cole Enterprises logo. She blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job." "A temporary one," he said. "Project assistant. Flexible hours. You can keep studying and still be with the girls." Her hands trembled slightly. "Ethan, I don't know if I'm ready." "You are," he replied. "You've already proven it every day." Grace hesitated, then smiled. "All right, I'll do it." Ethan's grin was instant. "Welcome to the team." Her first days at the office were nerve-wracking. The glass towers, the fast talk, the meetings, all of it felt foreign. But Ethan had built a patient team around her. They guided instead of judged, and soon Grace found a rhythm. Back at the mansion, the twins adjusted easily. Mrs. Walker kept them busy with painting and garden games, their laughter filling the halls. Sometimes Ethan would join them, rolling up his sleeves to help them build cardboard castles. Grace often paused at the doorway to watch. A man who had once been all business now laughing with two small girls as if he'd known them forever. Late one night Grace was still at her desk reviewing reports when Ethan walked in holding 2 cups of tea. "You're still working?" he asked. "Trying to finish this section before tomorrow." He set a cup beside her. "Then fuel up. You're doing great." Grace smiled, touched. "I'm learning, thanks to you." Ethan shook his head. "Thanks to you. I just opened a door." Silence settled comfortably between them. The crackle of the fireplace filled the gap words didn't need to. For the first time, the weight between them felt lighter. Something shifting quietly from gratitude to something deeper neither of them dared name yet. The weeks that followed were full of change. Grace settled into her new role at Cole Enterprises faster than she expected. She learned how to organize schedules, prepare reports, and coordinate meetings. At first she second-guessed every step, but with each small success her confidence grew. Ethan made sure she never felt lost. Whenever she stumbled, he was there with quiet reassurance instead of criticism. "You're learning," he would say. "That's all that matters." The office staff liked her. She wasn't just the boss's friend anymore. She was competent, calm, and quick to help. People noticed how Ethan's mood brightened whenever she entered a room. He noticed it too, though he tried to hide it behind his usual cool demeanor. At home the twins thrived. Every evening they raced to greet their mother, showing her drawings or garden flowers they'd picked with Mrs. Walker. Sometimes Ethan joined them outside, helping them build toy houses out of cardboard boxes. Grace would stand at the window watching him laugh with the girls, warmth spreading through her chest. She had stopped asking herself why he cared. She simply accepted that he did, and that his care made her believe in herself again. One afternoon during a team meeting, Grace surprised everyone with an idea to improve project logistics. When she finished explaining, the room went quiet for a moment. Then one of the senior managers nodded. "That's a clever adjustment," he said. Ethan smiled across the table. "Excellent work, Grace. We'll implement it immediately." After the meeting, she caught up with him in the hallway. "I was terrified you'd hate that idea." He laughed softly. "You underestimate yourself again." That evening they left the office together. In the parking lot, city lights shimmered against the wet pavement after a short rain. Ethan stopped beside her car. "Do you realize how much you've changed?" he asked. Grace smiled, embarrassed. "I still have a long way to go." "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he said. "You're already remarkable." The words stayed with her all night. She lay awake replaying them until she finally drifted off smiling. Days blurred into a comfortable routine. Ethan and Grace spent more time together, sometimes over dinner after work or during quiet mornings with coffee in the mansion's garden. Their conversations drifted easily from business to childhood memories to the silly things Ella and Emma did that day. Ethan found himself looking forward to those small talks more than any meeting or deal. Grace, meanwhile, realized her walls were slowly falling. She wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was beginning to feel safe enough to dream again. Yet part of her still feared trusting completely. Life had taught her that happiness could vanish overnight. Ethan sensed the hesitation but never rushed her. Patience, he decided, would say more than promises. Late one night he found her still awake in the study, surrounded by open books. "Burning the midnight oil again?" he asked. She smiled. "Old habits. I used to stay up worrying. Now I stay up learning." He leaned against the doorway. "That's progress." They shared a quiet laugh. The clock ticked softly. Then Ethan said, "Grace, you've built so much in such a short time. I hope you're proud of yourself." She met his gaze. "I am for once." For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them felt safe, heavy with words neither dared say yet. Spring arrived quietly. The mansion's garden bloomed with color, and laughter filled the air again. Ella and Emma spent most of their afternoons playing by the fountain, while Grace reviewed reports under the porch light. Life had finally found rhythm, calm, steady, and peaceful. But peace often invites doubt. Grace still caught herself wondering why Ethan had chosen to help her in the first place. He had every reason to keep his distance, yet he stayed. Every act of kindness made her grateful, and a little scared. That fear began to show one afternoon when her phone buzzed. The message came from an unknown number. Attached was a photo of Ethan at a restaurant, seated across from a woman in a business suit. The caption said, "Do you really know who he is?" Grace's chest tightened. For a few minutes she just stared at the screen. She knew Ethan met people for work, but something about the tone of that message felt poisonous. It whispered old fears, that she could lose everything good again. That evening Ethan came home in his usual calm, smiling at the twins and setting his briefcase down. Grace was quiet, her mind racing. When he finally noticed, he asked softly, "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then showed him the phone. Ethan's face hardened. "That was a business meeting," he said. "She's a consultant I hired for a project." Grace's voice trembled. "Then why would someone send this to me?" "I don't know," he said firmly. "But I'll find out." "Grace, listen. I would never do anything to hurt you." She wanted to believe him, but old wounds made trust fragile. "It's just things like this bring back memories," she murmured, "of being lied to, left behind." Ethan took her hands gently. "Then let me show you that this is different. I'm not him. I'm not anyone from your past." His tone was steady, honest, and something in her softened. She nodded slowly. "I want to trust you, Ethan. I really do." "Then give me the chance," he said. 2 days later, Ethan returned with proof. He placed a printed email thread and HR records in front of her. "The message came from a former employee I fired months ago," he explained. "Someone bitter, trying to stir trouble." Grace read through the pages and exhaled shakily. "So it really was just work." "Just work," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving hers. For the first time in days, her shoulders eased. "I'm sorry for doubting you," she whispered. "You don't need to apologize," he replied. "You've had enough reasons in life to be cautious. I just want you to know I'll never be one of them." His words struck deep. Grace blinked fast, fighting tears. "You're so different from what I'm used to," she said quietly. "It scares me sometimes." Ethan smiled gently. "Then let me keep being different until you're not scared anymore." For the first time, she didn't look away. She let his words stay. That night, something changed between them. No confession, no sudden gesture. Just an understanding that grew in the silence. The tension that had once been uncertainty began to feel like connection. Over the next few days, Grace noticed how naturally Ethan fit into her and the girls' lives. He helped with homework, joined tea parties, and told bedtime stories that made the twins giggle. He wasn't trying to replace anyone. He was just there, fully, consistently. Grace started to realize that love didn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it showed up quietly, in someone who stayed when they didn't have to. Rain clouds rolled in over the city that evening, painting the sky gray and still. Inside the mansion, the soft hum of Ella and Emma's laughter echoed through the halls as they played hide-and-seek behind the curtains. Grace watched them from the kitchen doorway, smiling to herself. Ethan stepped in quietly, leaning against the frame. "They're unstoppable," he said. "Like their mother," she replied with a teasing grin. He laughed. "I don't know how you do it, work, study the girls. You make it look easy." "It's not," she said softly, "but it finally feels worth it." For a moment they stood there, the space between them full of unspoken things. Then Ethan said, "There's something I need to tell you. Can we talk after the girls are asleep?" Grace nodded, heart quickening. That night, after bedtime stories and whispered good nights, she found him waiting in the living room. The fire cast a warm glow over the furniture. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Ethan gestured toward the couch. "Sit with me?" She did. For a long second he said nothing, just studied her face. The calm determination, the tired eyes that still held light. Finally he spoke. "Since you and the girls came into my life, everything's changed. I used to think success was enough. Then I saw you fight through everything and still stay gentle. You've reminded me what matters." Grace's breath caught. She didn't interrupt. Ethan continued, his voice lower now. "I care about you, Grace. More than I've ever cared about anyone. I know your heart's been broken before, and I know trust doesn't come easy. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The words landed heavy and tender at once. Grace looked at him, searching for doubt, but finding none. "I care about you too," she admitted quietly. "But this is still new. I need time to be sure. For me, for the girls." Ethan nodded, his expression calm. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." Lightning flickered outside, lighting the windows for a heartbeat. When it faded, they were still sitting close, a quiet understanding between them stronger than any promise. Weeks passed. The storm that night had washed away more than rain. It had cleared the air between them. Their days slipped into a gentle rhythm. Shared breakfasts, walks with the twins, evenings spent studying or talking until the house grew silent. One morning, as Grace prepared to leave for work, Ethan stopped her by the door. "You know," he said, "I think second chances were made for people like us." She smiled. Maybe they were. By summer, Grace's confidence bloomed fully. Her projects at the company earned praise, and she began mentoring new interns, something she never thought she'd do. Ethan watched proudly from a distance, always ready with encouragement, but never trying to take credit. The twins adored him completely. Every evening when he came home, they ran to meet him shouting, "Uncle Ethan," though by now everyone understood he was more than that. Grace had stopped fighting the feeling growing in her chest. It wasn't dependence anymore. It was choice, a conscious decision to let someone in. Late one afternoon, after a long meeting, Ethan walked into Grace's office with an envelope in hand. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I've been meaning to give you," he said, placing it on her desk. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "You once said you didn't know what the future holds. Maybe we can build it together." When she looked up, he was standing there with the faintest, hopeful smile. Grace rose slowly, her eyes glistening. "Are you sure you're ready for all three of us?" she asked, half laughing through emotion. Ethan reached for her hand. "I already am." That evening, Ella and Emma danced barefoot in the garden while Grace and Ethan watched from the porch, the sunset casting golden light across the lawn. The mansion that had once felt too big, too quiet, now rang with laughter. Grace turned to him and whispered, "I never thought life could feel like this again." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "It can, and it will." Above them, the first stars began to appear, small, steady lights against the fading sky, just like the life they had built. Fragile once, but now shining with quiet strength. Morning sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows of Ethan's mansion. The air smelled faintly of coffee and warm toast. Grace stood by the counter, watching Ella and Emma chase each other around the breakfast table. Their laughter filled every corner of the once quiet house. Ethan walked in, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "You'd think they had sugar for breakfast," he joked. "They did," Grace replied with a smirk, holding up an empty syrup bottle. He laughed, shaking his head. "That explains everything." It had been months since that stormy night when Ethan confessed his feelings. Since then, their bond had deepened in quiet, genuine ways. Morning routines, shared meals, unplanned moments that stitched a new kind of family together. The girls adored him. He never tried to replace what they'd lost. He simply showed up every day, with patience, warmth, and the kind of steadiness Grace had never known. That weekend, Ethan suggested a short trip to the countryside. "No phones, no meetings, just us," he said. They drove for hours until the city gave way to open fields and winding roads. The air felt lighter there. Ella and Emma ran ahead, laughing as they chased butterflies. Grace and Ethan followed behind, their hands brushing occasionally until finally, naturally, they stayed together. They spent the day feeding horses, skipping stones on a lake, and lying in the grass while the girls built crowns from wildflowers. Grace hadn't laughed so freely in years. On the drive back, the twins fell asleep in the back seat, their heads leaning against each other. Grace watched them for a while, then turned to Ethan. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For everything, for giving them a home, and for giving me one too." Ethan reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "You built this home, Grace. I just helped light the way." Back at the mansion, life moved on in steady rhythm. Grace's work continued to thrive. She completed her courses with honors and began taking on bigger roles at the company. Ethan had made her a partner, something she'd never dreamed possible. One evening, as they worked late in the office, Ethan looked up from his desk and said, "Do you remember the night I found you on that corner?" Grace nodded quietly. "I remember thinking that if I could do one good thing in my life, it would be helping you stand again. But now, you're the one keeping me grounded." She smiled, eyes bright. "Then I guess we saved each other." Autumn came quickly. The trees around the mansion turned gold, and the air filled with the scent of rain. The girls started school, proudly wearing their new backpacks, while Grace prepared their lunches every morning with care. Ethan would stand at the doorway, coffee in hand, watching them leave with a soft grin. Every small, ordinary moment reminded him how extraordinary life had become. One crisp evening, after dinner, the twins fell asleep early. The house was quiet except for the faint crackle of the fireplace. Grace and Ethan sat together on the couch. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" "All the time," he replied. "And I still can't believe it's real." Grace smiled softly. "It feels real now. For the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for the next bad thing. I'm just here." Ethan wrapped an arm around her. "Then that's exactly where you should be." Months later, on a calm spring morning, Grace stood in the garden holding something new, an ultrasound photo. Her hands trembled as she waited for Ethan to finish a call. When he turned around, she smiled nervously and handed it to him. He froze for a second, then looked at her, his eyes wide. "Are you?" She nodded, tears shining. "Yes." Ethan's smile broke wide open. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her once before holding her close. "Grace," he whispered against her hair, "this is the best news of my life." From the porch, Ella and Emma cheered when they saw the picture, not fully understanding but sensing the joy. Their family, once built from broken pieces, was now growing again. Months passed, filled with gentle chaos and new laughter. Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a bright summer morning. Ethan held him in his arms, his voice shaking with emotion. "Welcome home, little one," he said. Grace watched through tears as the twins peeked over the edge of the hospital bed, eyes wide with awe. "He's so small," Ella whispered. Grace smiled. "He won't be for long." Back at the mansion, the nursery was ready. Painted soft blue, sunlight pouring through white curtains. Life had come full circle. That night, as everyone slept, Grace stood by the crib, looking down at her son. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "He's perfect," he murmured. She nodded. "Everything finally feels right." They stood there in silence, surrounded by peace, the faint hum of the city far away. After everything they had survived, they had built something stronger, something real. When morning light touched the room, Grace whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan, for finding me that night." He smiled, kissing her forehead. "No, gracias. Thank you for letting me." Outside, the world went on, cars passing, birds calling. But inside the Bennett home, time felt still. The story that began on a cold street corner had become a life of warmth and love. Proof that even the most broken hearts could find their way back to happiness.